Newsshooter coverage of Cine Gear 2024 is sponsored by B&H and Atlas Lens Co.
Hi, it's Matt here for Newsshooter.com at the Canon headquarters at Burbank, California. I'm with Paul. Now, you've just released the C400. For people who may not be familiar with it, just give me a quick run through of the basics.
Yeah, so this is our new Cinema EOS camera with an RF native mount, 6K, full frame, back illuminated stack sensor. So it's gonna be a very fast sensor with full on 6K up to 60p in RAW. We can window crop that to 4K up to 120p, or even go down to Super 16 up to 180p. So all internal RAW using our Canon RAW Lite codec, which has HQ, ST, and LT options. But we also have our regular XF-AVC codecs and two new codecs. We have XF-HEVC-S and XF-AVC-S. All right, so HEVC-S is a H.265 based codec, and AVC-S is our standard H.264 based codec. Both of them come in an MP4 wrapper, and what's new about these is that they retain metadata and they retain file naming structures from our legacy XF-AVC and from the RAW files. And that was something that's new to an MP4 wrapped codec. So that's very cool. One extra thing about the sensor, which I really, really like, and you may not see this out there, but there is an option where it will actually read the system frequencies of LED walls and LED lighting. So it's called an auto clear scan mode. And it will sit there and it will read the frequency, and it'll pop up on the screen and say, this wall is running at 115.64 hertz. And you can set the shutter directly to that.
So that clear scan, that'll also work with computer monitors, TV screens, fluorescent lights, for instance?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, it's kind of funny, anything that is outputting that frequency that you need to sync with, this camera will be able to read that. And then just make it a very easy workflow there.
And now going back to the sensor, this is new back illuminated stack sensor. So this is the first time you've used a sensor like that in the Cinema EOS camera. Why use this instead of, say, a DGO sensor?
So one of the big things is actually because it's full frame, right? So we have some options here for going back illuminate. First off, by going back illuminate, it allows us to expand the usable size of our autofocus. Before, we were down to an 80% autofocus, right? And that's just because of the way that the standard CMOS sensors were constructed. By moving the wiring around each of the photodiodes to behind them, we've now expanded the field of view that each of the micro lenses can achieve and send the image circle of those micro lenses to the photodiode. So now we can actually get that full coverage. So that was very important for us to be able to maximize the coverage and include the new dual pixel autofocus 2 into this camera as well. Another thing about that as well is going back illuminated, is that we can increase the readout speed of the sensor. This is a very, very fast full frame sensor. So this is going to be very helpful for, again, with things like LED walls or any kind of rolling shutter artifacts there.
And you managed to keep the dynamic range pretty high, comparable to the C300 Mark II?
Yeah.
Mark III, sorry?
Absolutely, yeah. We're looking at 16 total stops on dynamic range, but that leads us into another option of the sensor, which is the triple base ISO. And again, this is going to expand the range of just creative options that people have. So now if I'm doing Canon Log 2, I have 800, 3200, and 12,800 as possible base ISOs. And from that point on, you can select one of those, and then you can go down, you can pull down into a lower ISO and really dig deep into the shadows and really clean up a lot of noise and shadows. So you have a ton of options on how to shoot in low light situations with this camera.
And what's also interesting is that there's an auto setting for that as well. So how does that work?
Yeah, so there is an auto setting, and this is going to be great for people who are doing live events, right? Because basically you set it into auto, and as you start running through your ISO, it's just going to take over for you and say, if I get up to 3200 ISO, it's going to kick into that base 3200, and it's going to kick in. It's going to clean it up a little bit. If I go further than that, if I get up to 12,800 for some reason, it will then kick in again, clean it up a little bit. But again, it's just, you don't have to worry about it at that point. And that's for people doing live event type stuff and broadcast stuff. So.
Now, people are probably wondering, why go 6K instead of 8K? Is there a reason for that?
I just think it's the combination of getting the full frame to read out at the speed that we wanted it to read out at. Also for the dual pixel CMOS autofocus too, that as well. And also, 6K is really kind of a sweet spot we're experiencing right now for data rates, but also if you take a look at the trend of the film industry as well, is that 8K still really isn't there. People are using, look at the films out at Con right now. Vast majority of them were shot on 2K cameras, right? And 6K provides us a very, very nice sweet spot there. So
Now, in terms of the form factor, it's a little bit boxier than, say, the C500 Mark II, but only by a little bit. You've done away with the modules as well on the back. So what was the rationale with that, putting everything into a sort of more all-in-one unit?
I think that was the plan with this camera, and where this camera sits was to try to jam as much of that I/O into the camera body, keeping it small, giving it an option for people to use kind of across a whole genre. So either for creative or for live events. Because you can really see on the live end what we can do with the DIN connectors for time code, as well as Genlock and return video. Having those built directly in, we can now set up our whole like house of worship style shooting without having to go into expansion units, without having to pay extra for other accoutrements there. So I think the philosophy was just, let's see what we can fit into one camera body while keeping the weight of it small, keeping the size of it small, and having it be versatile enough to fill the needs of both filmmakers and live events.
And audio-wise, you've had to go with mini XLRs. I take that's probably because of the size of the camera. Now, it does have a hot shoe interface. Is there any plans for Canon to make their own, say, full-size XLR adapter that could sit on the top?
So right now we do have the Tascam created XLR adapter right there. So we have that. We do also have a stereo microphone made by Canon that goes on the top. We do have some other items coming in the future, but nothing I can really talk about right now.
There's an LCD but no viewfinder on this camera, which some people may look at and might be a little bit controversial. Is there a rationale for why no viewfinder?
Again, it plays into where we decide to go without the expansion units as well. And it kind of also places that camera where we are kind of, in between that C300, C500 level as well. As for not having the viewfinder, because we've gone with the USB-C style connector now for our main video output for the LCD screen, we're going to be working a lot with third-party companies, and we're going to see what they can come up with there. So
now I was going to go back and ask you, this sort of sits in between the C300 Mark III and C500 Mark II, obviously, I guess, given the name C400. Is this sort of is it aimed as a replacement for either of those cameras?
So no, actually. No, actually, the C300 Mark III and the C500 Mark II are still going strong, still be on the market there. And they certainly do have options that you get, especially with those expansion units, that you don't have right off the bat with this camera. So those are still viable options. But this camera does do quite a bit, right? And I think this is going to be an excellent choice who people are taking a look and say, I'm not at the level where I need some of those higher options. This would actually fit perfectly for me in my small studio or in my small house of worship setup there.
Power-wise, it uses Canon BPA batteries, but you also got two new versions of that available.
Yeah, and shipping with this camera is going to be a BPA 60N. So this is our extended new battery. There's also going to be BPA 30N batteries as well. And so these are new versions of our current BPA 30 batteries. And the big thing about them is that they output a little bit more power. And that's going to be powering the multifunction shoe that we talked about, as well as the 12-pin Hiroshi lens terminal that we put into the front of the body there. So using these batteries, I can go ahead and power those. Now, fear not, we can still use the old BPA style batteries. So if you have a bunch of those, you can absolutely use those. But when you use those batteries alone, you won't have the functionality of the multifunction shoe, and you won't have power to the lens terminal in the front.
And on the back here, you've got the same 4 mounting points where you can put a third-party, say, V-Lock gold mount battery adapter.
Yeah, absolutely. And so those mounting points match up with the C300 Mark III and C500 Mark II mounting points as well. And that's just because so many third-party companies have been working on and producing extra battery modules and things that screw into there. So that's still an option there. And we're going to be leaning really heavily on our third parties to create other battery options as well. You'll be able to screw into there. A lot of them I've seen go straight to the 4-pin XLR, so straight into there. And that's how they're going to provide the power outputs. So your 3-pin Fisher, your P-taps, we're really relying heavily on those third parties to create those items for us.
And one more thing, just because I thought it was important for maybe solo operators, small crews, you've moved the audio controls over to the operator side, which is pretty handy.
Yeah, and that was actually almost immediate feedback when we released the C500 Mark II from day one, and the C300 Mark III was people were upset that they had the audio dials on the non-operating side of the camera. And so I think the first thing they probably did was like, okay, let's move those over here. So yeah, just now the side that everybody's touching, you have the audio dials as well.
In terms of pricing and availability, when's it going to ship and how much will it cost?
So yeah, right now we're looking at $7,999 USD, and it's going to be available in September of this year.